Hello, my name is Carolyn Gannett, and I'm the manager of the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Welcome to the Multi-Species Management and Conservation Awareness virtual workshop. This is a joint workshop hosted by Nature Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Prairie Plan. When we've had these workshops, the small town I hope everyone can hear me. I had an audio issue, disconnected. Anyways, we're so happy that you could join us tonight. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For a millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and communities, past and present. Oh, sorry. So for a millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life that these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. This evening, we have a nice lineup of speakers. We'll start with Ashley Vass from Nature Saskatchewan providing an update on their programs. And then we'll have François Blouin and Heather Peatham discuss the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association's Habitat and Biodiversity Assessment Tool. And then we'll close out the evening with myself and Sue Mahalski, who will go over PCAP's Multi-Species at Risk Habitat Attributes Guide. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. A reminder to all our listeners out there, you are all currently muted and we can't see you, in case that was a concern. There is the option to only view the presentation and not the webcam if bandwidth is an issue where you are. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. If you are on a cell phone, you can send your question by chat to the organizer. Questions will be answered at the end of each presentation as time permits, so we may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll try our best. This workshop is being recorded and will be uploaded to PCAP's and Nature Sask's YouTube channels in the near future. I would like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's workshop is provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Mosaic Company, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, TC Energy, the ELSA Fund, the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, and the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act. Now I will pass it over to Ashley from Nature Saskatchewan. Ashley has been with Nature Saskatchewan since 2014 and is the Rare Plant Rescue Habitat Stewardship Coordinator.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Just going to share my webcam here. Great. Okay, so hi everybody. Again, thanks Carolyn for the introduction, and Nature Sask is really happy to be partnering with PCAP for this event. Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're happy to have you here. So first of all, I get to start with the fun part. Did somebody say prizes? So we're going to actually have 3 door prizes to give away tonight: a copy of our Birds of Saskatchewan book, as well as 2 shirts. It'll be your choice of either a long sleeve shirt featuring a monarch butterfly sketch, or one of our Operation Burrowing Owl 30th anniversary shirts that features a burrowing owl sketch. So the choice would be yours, but be aware that sizes are limited. With each of the 3 prizes, we're also going to include a 2021 Species at Risk calendar and a free Nature Saskatchewan membership. So if you're unable to stay for the whole presentation, don't worry, because we're still going to enter you into the door prize draw, and the winners are going to be notified via email afterwards. Oh, I also just want to plug that all of this merchandise and more is available at our store online. So all the fundraising from the merchandise goes towards programming. So please take a look at our store at naturesask.ca/store. Okay, so I'm going to kick off the talks tonight and just give a brief presentation. I'll briefly talk about Nature Sask as an organization, and then I'll get into our Stewards of Saskatchewan programs. But before I do that, I want to do a poll. So Carolyn, if you could load up the first poll, just to get to know each other a little bit. There we go. Okay, so if you're able and willing, if you could please select which best describes you. So we've got a few categories there. I'll give you a minute to load up some responses here. If you're anything like me, you might fit into a few of these categories, but that's okay. We're not going to require proof. So I don't know if you can tell, Carolyn, if you're getting some responses.
Yeah, about 97% have voted so far.
Oh, okay, that's great.
So I'll close it and show it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
See if I can see the answers. Could you read me the percentages there?
Sure. Landowner, producer, agriculture is at 28%. Researcher, academic, student is 8%.
Okay.
Naturalist, environmental supporter is 25%. Working in the environmental field is 25%, and other is 14%.
That's awesome. We have a really good mix, and it's interesting to see that it's quite a bit different from our last event that we had. So that's wonderful. It's great to be able to speak to a diverse crowd. Thank you for doing the poll. Okay, so just a brief overview of Nature Saskatchewan. If you're not familiar with us, Nature Saskatchewan was founded in 1949. We're a non-government charitable organization. We're a member-based organization, so we currently have about 600 members. We're locally affiliated with 16 nature societies, and our national affiliate is Nature Canada. And we are Saskatchewan's largest volunteer-driven nonprofit naturalist organization. And we pride ourselves on being a voice for nature in Saskatchewan. So Nature Saskatchewan's vision is humanity in harmony with nature, and our mission is to engage and inspire people to appreciate, learn about, and conserve Saskatchewan's natural environment. While Nature Saskatchewan has many different types of programming, I'm just going to specifically focus on the Stewards of Saskatchewan programs for tonight. So these programs are aimed at conserving prairie habitat for all prairie species, but they focus on their respective target species, so they all have slight differences from one another. However, they were all modeled after the oldest and largest SOS program, which is Operation Burrowing Owl. It was initiated in 1987, and it's actually one of the longest running stewardship programs, voluntary stewardship programs in Canada. And this program targets, of course, the endangered burrowing owl. Rare Plant Rescue focuses on 16 federally listed and provincially rare plant species. Shrubs for Shrikes targets the threatened loggerhead shrike. Plovers on Shore focuses on the endangered piping plover. And then our most recent program that was initiated in 2010 is the Stewards of Saskatchewan Banner Program. This one was created to offer opportunities to landowners that wanted to engage in our programs and conserve habitat for species at risk that weren't already targeted by the original 4. Okay, so by using ambassador species, such as the iconic burrowing owl, to promote habitat conservation within a specific program, all of the programs are allowed to sort of work towards the goal of overall prairie conservation and maintaining biodiversity throughout Saskatchewan. Okay, so now that we've done a quick review of the Stewards of Saskatchewan programs, let's do another poll. So Carolyn, if you don't mind launching this poll. Here we go. So I'd like to know if you have heard of the Stewards of Saskatchewan programs before tonight. And your options are yes, I'm a participant, yes, I've heard of them, or no. And I'll just give a minute for people to respond to that one. It's less reading than the last question. So how are we doing on this one, Carolyn?
Good, we're at 95%.
Okay.
So I'll close it.
Somebody grabbed a drink of water or something. I should be able to read the responses on this one. Oh, it's still a little too small for me. Would you mind reading the percentages?
Sure. 5% said that yes, I'm a participant of one or more programs. 73% said yes, that they had heard of the programs before, and 22% said no.
Okay, that's excellent. So yeah, it's really great. I'm glad to know that the word is getting out there and people have heard of the programs. I'm also happy to be able to bring some new information to people that haven't heard of us before. And of course, it's fantastic to hear that some of our participants are on tonight. So thanks so much. It's nice to be able to speak at you. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of our programming. So all four of the Nature Saskatchewan stewardship programs have the same goals, or sorry, the 5 programs have 4 main goals. The first is habitat stewardship. Second is site identification and population monitoring. The third goal is habitat enhancement. And the fourth is education and awareness. So with habitat stewardship, our objective is to conserve habitat for the target species and for other wildlife through voluntary stewardship agreements and informed stewardship action. Participants sign a voluntary handshake agreement, so they agree to conserve the nesting areas and the habitat for the species. They agree to not unduly disturb the species, and they also agree to annually report species observations on their land. This agreement is non-binding and it can actually be canceled at any time. So these commitments are really attractive to landowners because they're not too invasive or binding. However, you know, generally people don't cancel the agreements. So they're able to at any time, but people stick with the programs because they really enjoy them once they get involved. Currently, there's 935 program participants, and they're conserving over 475,000 acres and 137 miles of shoreline habitat. And this is for the target species at risk, but also other wildlife. So also, when we say informed stewardship, we basically mean confirming what practices that landowners and participants are already doing that are supporting the species and the habitat. And then we share small changes that they might want to consider to further enhance or support the habitat through site-specific management practices plans. And then we also ensure that we can keep up to date on which options exist to support landowners that are stewarding the land. So for example, conservation easements is one example, and we can connect landowners that are interested in that with a host organization, and they can discuss those options further. We provide information and support to landowners by visiting as many as possible every year. Landowner visits are a vital component of the programs, and they serve many purposes. So face-to-face landowner visits are a really great way of just creating that initial relationship, but also maintaining the relationship for years to come. So site identification and population monitoring. One of the most important activities is the annual population monitoring. Our objective is to monitor target populations and distribution changes through an annual census at participating enrolled lands. For the most part, our monitoring is really done by the participants. So it's through an annual census card that we mail every spring, and we send one out for all of the enrolled land locations. The landowners report the species observations on those locations, as well as any habitat changes or land use changes. Rare plant rescue, though, is a little bit different. So we don't expect participants to go out and search for rare plants and, you know, counting every individual stem on their pasture. We actually do this for them. We have a search and monitoring crew that goes out each year to do just that. So they search for new occurrences of plant species at risk, and they also monitor historic or known populations. The SOS staff also conduct grid road surveys for species at risk, and then we'll also verify species sightings that are reported to the hoot line. With landowner permission, the species occurrence information is given to the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Centre and to the applicable recovery team leads at Environment Canada. The Conservation Data Centre houses all the species occurrence information for the province, and no personal information is ever shared. Okay, habitat enhancement. So we offer funding to increase and improve habitat for wildlife, with the focal species for these projects being burrowing owls, Sprague's pipits, ferruginous hawks, and piping plovers. To date, we've funded 137 projects. Currently, the habitat enhancement projects include native seeding, and this is to convert cropland, enlarge pastures, and reduce fragmentation. Wildlife-friendly fencing to preserve newly seeded areas, also to improve pasture health, and we also have projects to protect ferruginous hawk nesting sites. And we also do alternative water development. So for example, solar pumps, and this is also to improve pasture health, as well as to protect shoreline. Depending on the type of project, it's either a 50% or 100% cost share basis up to a certain maximum dollar amount. And participants sign a 12-year contract to ensure the long-term benefits of the habitat enhancement projects. Education and awareness is our third objective. With this objective, we increase awareness and provide information to landowners, but also just members of the general public about species at risk, biodiversity, and the importance of conserving prairie habitat. We do 2 mailouts every year to our participants, and this is to keep them in the loop and involved, and also so they know that they're appreciated. So our spring mailout includes a census card, as I mentioned, for the annual population monitoring, and it also includes updates on programs and any plans for the summer that we know of. The fall mailout includes our annual newsletter, and this actually can keep participants informed about any new information on species at risk, our programs, as well as other research and events going on in the province. Our fall mailout also includes our very popular species at risk calendar that's a part of the door prize package tonight. We also hold conservation awareness and appreciation events throughout southern and central Saskatchewan. We normally do 2 to 3 every year. It's an expression of our thanks and appreciation to our participants. So not only do we provide information, but we also provide a catered supper and other presentations and fun activities for kids. Unfortunately, we aren't able to hold in-person events, so we aren't able to do these catered suppers at the moment, but we're really excited to start them up again when we're able to. So the stewards involved in our programs are really the backbone of everything that we do. So they're the reason that we've been able to continue for so many years. They're the ones that are managing and caring for both the habitat and the species. And it's because of their care that many of the species at risk that we deal with still even have habitat. So I just want to give a special thank you to all our participants. And of course, especially the ones that are watching tonight. We're thinking about you, and we definitely can't wait to get out there and visit again and see how everything's going when we're allowed to. So what do I do if I spot a species at risk? Call the hoot line. So we have a toll-free hoot line. It's 1-800-667-HOOT. Calling in species at risk observations can help determine the abundance and distribution of species at risk in Saskatchewan. And of course, it can also potentially lead to habitat conservation for the species at risk and the other wildlife that rely on that habitat. It's important to note that caller information is kept confidential and personal information is never shared without permission. And this includes not only the person who's reporting the sighting, but it also includes the landowner who owns the property where the occurrence was, or where the species was observed. So that's that. Thank you. I want to thank everybody so much for being here tonight. But of course, I'd like to thank our partners and supporters and all of those, who've contributed in various ways and capacities over the years. We wouldn't be able to do any of this work without the support from our funders, partners, and most importantly, as I've mentioned before, the stewards. So thank you so much. So that's it for me, Carolyn, if there's any questions.
Thanks, Ashley. There are no questions currently.
Okay. Feel free to email me.
So if anyone has any questions about any of the SOS programs. Oh, there is one question.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions about the SOS programs, you can type them in the dashboard, and Caitlin Burrows is navigating, or I guess moderating and watching that question box. She can answer those questions for you once we've moved on to the next presentation. So the one question that there is what can RMs do to support Nature Saskatchewan's mission?
Oh, RMs, yeah, well, there's lots of things they can do. So we can provide you with posters of species that we're looking for, posters that would include our hoot line. So then, people can get our phone number, and if they see species at risk, they can definitely give us a call. Also, if there's graders and obviously RM staff that are going to be out there on the roads and stuff, so they can watch out for species too. But when it comes to road graders, we've had some instances where there's been burrowing owl burrows. Sometimes they burrow straight into the ditch, like right at the side of the road. So the graders can keep an eye out for those. And we've even had occasions where they've put up flags and kind of avoided that, grading that area. So that's been a huge help. And we also have a lot of information that we can spread. So we have brochures and all sorts of stuff. Our calendar even, we can send those out to the RMs, and getting the word out there is one of the best ways to support, the species and habitat conservation. It's nice to have neighbors and people talking about it together. More of a community feel. It really helps out.
Awesome, thanks, Ashley. We'll move on to our next presentation.
Thank you. Yeah,
thanks for the presentation. Now a bit about our presenters. François Blouin is a wildlife biologist with 25 years of experience on species at risk conservation and habitat stewardship in the Prairie provinces. He has been the lead consultant in the development of the Habitat and Biodiversity Assessment tool for the Alberta Environmental Farm Plan, and provides advice and support for the development and implementation of HVAT in other provinces. Heather Pete Ham is an ecologist, illustrator, and a species at risk consultant, currently working for the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association to adapt the Habitat and Biodiversity Assessment tool for Saskatchewan producers. Okay, so Heather, we're just waiting to see your screen.
Okay.
Have you accepted the?
I have. It should be up. Mine's showing up. Sorry. There we go.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. Always a few little glitches with online. It's so much easier in person, but meanwhile, we'll make do with what we have. Yeah, so I want to speak to you about building a habitat and biodiversity assessment tool for Saskatchewan. And the background on this is that a habitat and biodiversity assessment tool was built for Alberta's agricultural landscape in, I think, over the last 3 years, and Francois can correct me on that. And it was built to be part of the Environmental Farm Plan. And last year, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association was given the mandate to expand the tool and adapt the tool for use in other provinces. And the current work is ongoing to adapt the tool for Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia. And clearly I am working on the Saskatchewan tool with counterparts in those other 2 provinces. And Francois is providing all the technical assistance to connect us to the actual tool and process our data and answer every question every day. We keep him busy. So you may ask, well, why do we want this tool? And one of the reasons we're looking at that increasingly markets in agricultural products are concerned about the sustainability of land used to produce the product. And for example, if you look at like One Planet Business for Biodiversity, and you look at the businesses that are becoming part of that, you look at Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and there are others. So this tool is hopefully beginning to assist landowners in working towards continued stewardship that's already ongoing and meeting new market needs. So the goals of the tool from a landowner's perspective is to evaluate what species are potentially on your land, to determine what habitat exists on your land, and this is through a question system that Francois will describe in more detail. And then it will provide suggested stewardship opportunities that contribute to habitat stewardship and often to the resilience of operations as well. So if there's an opportunity for both things, we try to include those so that it is more attractive to partake of. So then, as well as that, then it provides a list of resources to help. Online information and other agencies that can assist you with guidance of funding. And I know that this has been not an issue, but it's something that we need to collaborate on in Saskatchewan, that there are a lot of great organizations that do great work. So we're hoping that this can provide links to all of those and help people make sense of a little bit of a complex landscape. So for the area of application for Saskatchewan, we have to determine what is the agricultural area, and we use the crop districts and rural municipalities in Saskatchewan, and you can see it overlain on the ecoregions of Saskatchewan map on the right. It is the thick black line, and it encompasses all of the grassland, aspen parkland, boreal transition, and portions of the mid-boreal uplands and lowlands. So then you ask what species we might have in Saskatchewan, and there are some overlaps with Alberta, and we've been able to use some of their stewardship opportunities developed. But for Saskatchewan, we've included all SARA listed species, but also COSOIC listed species or ranked species that are endangered, threatened, or of special concern. Additionally, I added several tracked species that are tracked by the Conservation Data Center in Saskatchewan that have a large interface with agriculture. In total, we have 74 species currently. So in the future, species can be added or removed. It depends on how the tool evolves and how species are as they are reevaluated and on an ongoing basis with COSOIC. So this is what the list looks like, and I don't anticipate you're going to read all of this, but you can see the birds listed down the center, a considerable number, insects on the my screen right, a lot of pollinators, some of which are very generalists in the landscape, and some of which are very specific and have only very particular hosts. Reptiles and amphibians on the left, several snakes, lizard, the more ubiquitous northern leopard frog, more widespread generalist, prairie rattlesnakes, and some species that come in just as part of the tallgrass prairie fringes, I guess you'd say, into the parkland, such as snapping turtle. In mammals, American badger is now listed, the little brown bat and the northern bat, swift fox, pronghorn, and a few fish are included. And over on the right, down on the bottom, a list of federally listed plant species, as well as plains rough fescue. So what we did with Saskatchewan is on the right-hand side is the database knowledge. So these are the pieces of information that the database uses in its decision-making matrix to assist the farmer, landowner. So there is species risks, species range, data and habitat models information, species habitat requirements, and then a more complexity around species specific and habitat specific stewardship opportunities. These sometimes apply just to a particular species, but often to a larger group of species. And then all of the species stewardship opportunities are compared against each other, and so that we don't end up recommending contrary opportunities that we end up, you know, helping one species and hindering another in the same package. So yeah, we've used occurrence data from 2000 to 2020, range data that's available generally through Canadian Wildlife Services, habitat suitability index models, and then literature-based habitat data with specifics for Saskatchewan ecoregions. So with that, we've developed all of the background tools and information data required for Saskatchewan tool to make it operate on our landscape. So then with those pieces of information, what does the tool do with it and how does this tool work? And that I am going to turn over to Francois, who will explain how the tool works and some of the underpinnings and also demo the tool.
Thank you, Heather, and good night, good evening, everybody. Yeah, so I got to go to the. I'm already at the end of the presentation there, so let's start at the beginning. All right, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation through the process itself. I'm going to show you a little bit about how the tool itself, like how it's organized, and then we're going to go through a little demonstration using the Alberta site, so see how it works. So Heather mentioned that as part of the process, we needed to know what area to focus, and Heather mentioned how the crop district ended up being the focal area for this project. That's where the agricultural work takes place. But we also needed to know what kind of management unit we were going to provide recommendation at what level. And since Saskatchewan, it is divided into quarter section townships range, and a lot of the management actually takes place at the quarter section level. We figured the quarter section would be a good management unit to use for this to provide stewardship opportunities. Everything else being equal, we wanted to focus on species that are the most threatened, I guess, the most at risk of disappearing. And as Heather mentioned, we looked at the federal list, but she also looked at the CDC data center list as well. And we ranked them, but in order in decreasing order of level of endangerment. So the endangered was the highest priority, threatened second, and special concern had the third priority. We also added to that some priority as well related to whether the species was restricted in distribution or had some specific habitat requirements, such as the specific habitat features, or needed a minimum area patch size, or required a certain ecological conditions like pH, temperature, and whatnot. So that raised the profile, if you want, the level of priority for the species. Also, we wanted to prioritize our stewardship opportunities in two ways. We looked at the expected impact on the habitat, so either to maintain or increase habitat and habitat quality, and if the expected impact was high, well, it was ranked higher, and if it was felt to be medium or lower, then it was ranked accordingly. And but that's species biased, obviously. We can have some good stewardship opportunities out there, but if there's no uptake by producers, then it's not going to happen. So we wanted to also rank or prioritize their stewardship opportunities based on the potential of adoption by agricultural producers. And that was evaluated based on the anticipated or expected cost of implementing those stewardship opportunities, the time that might be required, so the time to implement, and maybe the long-term maintenance as well that could be involved, and the economics of the impact on the bottom line of agricultural producers. And whether it's negative or no impact, or maybe continued loss, or maybe even positive. Sometimes some of them have a beneficial impact. So again, there's a rank where it's a high, fair, or lower potential of adoption. And you'll see how this all comes together in the demonstration I'll do after. Also, the number of species impacted by the stewardship opportunity gives it also a higher priority. So you got on the left side here stewardship opportunities that will potentially help 6 species, and on the right hand side only 1. So it's still a good thing to do, but the one that's on the left side obviously will get a higher priority in our ranking system. So then the final stewardship opportunity priority, how we prioritize it, takes into account what we just saw: the number of species, the level of endangerment of those species, and whether they have a restricted distribution or specific habitat requirements, and whether how important the impact is anticipated to be on the species, or the potential to be adopted by agricultural producers. But there's also a look at the quality of the data that we are using to determine what species occur in a particular quarter section, and we call that our level of confidence in the data set. So, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So Heather mentioned some of the sources of data for occurrence information about species at risk. And so some of these are available as really accurate information, so we can get locational information, lat and long, that are given with high accuracy, so they've been measured with using a GPS, something like that. So very precise. You can go back out there with the same coordinates and find exactly where the species occur. So we get either point data, we get sometimes line data for, let's say, a creek that where this could be frogs happening in there, occurring in there, and also areas that maybe a patch of habitat for some plants. But we also get some information where the precision is not, the accuracy is not as great, where we're provided with, let's say, the species occurs, but in a certain area, but it's given as the middle of a quarter section or the middle of a section. It's even less accurate, right? So we don't know within that particular area, within that particular section, where exactly where that species occurs. So we have to create those buffers of uncertainty around that observation to capture the potential for that species to be there. So it's not as we're not as confident in those data, so we take that into consideration. We also have, as I mentioned, some models, some species habitat models or species distribution models, and usually if those models are well built and very robust. They're able to give a good idea of where the species can occur. So they can be quite reliable, and there's a way to test for that. So those could be reliable. On the right-hand side, we have range maps, which it's outlines the area, general area where the species is expected to or known to occur, but it doesn't tell you exactly where within that area the species occur, because there's no information about the habitat. So it's just a kind of an outline. So it's not as reliable information, but it still provide the information about species occurring within that area as a greater potential than being outside that area. So there's still a useful information in that. So in evaluating another thing that the tool does is it evaluate the compatibility of those stewardship opportunities. And so, like Heather mentioned, that touched on that a little bit too. If we're providing several stewardship opportunities into the same quarter section, we have to make sure that they're compatible with one another. And we have an example here of a stewardship opportunity where it's on the left side. It's saying maintain or plant shelter belt to achieve tall shrubs. And a second opportunity on the right-hand side is do not plant trees or shrubs. So those two are obviously incompatibles and should not be provided within the same quarter section. So what the tool does, it actually separate those stewardship opportunities that are compatible, put them into packages of compatible stewardship opportunities, and therefore landowners or producers are asked to pick within packages, not among packages. So this is what our online tool, it's a sketch of the online tool, if you want. We have on the left-hand side here a secure user interface that producers will access using a password and a login name and password. And then there's background information, background database that is not seen by the landowner, the producers, but it's actually where all the calculations are done. So what the producer is asked to do then is to enter the legal land description as an input. And that looks into our occurrence database, and it picks out a first list of potential species for that location. So then a second thing that's provided to producer, to the user, is the list of habitat types or features that occur in the quarter section, that potentially could occur in the quarter section, and the producer is asked to check those that actually occur in the quarter section. So the producer becomes the eyes for the habitat types, habitat features that are there. And that queries are list of table of habitat species habitat requirements. So based on the habitat requirements of species, we come out with another list of species as well. So we have two lists now that are compared with one another. And where we have a match, we end up with a reduced list of potential species for the location and for the habitats that are present at that location. Then those species, the species habitat combination there helps us select the stewardship opportunities for those species. And these are actually goes through the compatibility assessment process. And that, like I mentioned earlier, those that are compatible are grouped together into packages. And then we bring all the information to prioritize the data. We mentioned about the level, the species, their level of endangerment, the ranking for the stewardship opportunities, the number of species that are involved, and the data quality. That's all combined together and then into put through our prioritizing protocol to provide an output to the producer. And that output includes all the packages, the different packages of mutually compatible stewardship opportunities within the packages, but not among the packages. So producers are asked to pick within packages. There's also additional information on the individual species that are expected to occur in that quarter section, and some organizations as well that could help with either implementing those some of these stewardship opportunities, or answer some questions, or maybe even financial support. So I'm going to move on right now to the demonstration. So this is a public tool of the Habitat and Biodiversity Assessment tool for Alberta. So therefore, the legal land description that I enter over here is randomized in order to not to for security, for not reveal information, private information for those landowners. So I'm just going to enter a random quarter section here. And Alberta, Meridian is Fort, west of Fort. Okay, and right away, the first list of species was queried. We don't see that right now, but it will come up. But now here's the second aspect that the producer is asked to answer, is to check all the list of potential habitat features, habitat types that are there. You'll notice that we have a question about whether wind turbines are present in there. It's just because some species actually could be impacted by the presence of a wind turbine. So we don't want to offer some stewardship opportunities that may attract the species in that area. So I'm going to say no for this. And and also as we progress, you'll see that when I click on some of these, it opens up some other sub categories, if you want, of habitat type features. We have up to 3 levels of categories of habitat type features. And so I'm just going to say no on this one. I'm going to say there is cultivation, but the cultivation is non-irrigated. And I'm going to say there are ground squirrels. There's a few in Saskatchewan, I heard. Also, I'm going to say no farmstead. There's no hay on this quarter section, maybe. We'll say there's milkweed. And we'll say there's native grassland, let's say. And you can see here the subcategory that opens up. And we'll say it's likely to moderately grazed or more productive areas. And then we'll move on. Tame pasture, we'll say no. No, let's put some water in there. Maybe we'll put a stream along the way, and we'll say there's maybe some shrubs along the stream there. Shrubs or isolated trees, so we'll put some shrubs there. Riparian shrubs, there we go. Okay, and now we've answered all the questions here, and we'll move on to the next step. So right away, it's really, really quick. We already have our stewardship opportunities in Alberta. They're presented, if you present the first 3, and then we move on to the report afterwards. So what you see, they're divided on the left-hand side. You can see there's the list of species that are I expect it to be positively impacted by the stewardship opportunity, and those are the species that occur at that quarter section, or expected potential for that quarter section. The stewardship opportunity in the middle there, it's this particular one. It says retain and maintain land as native prairie, and there's a score on the right-hand side as well. We talked about that, the ranking aspect, and the higher this score, the greater the impact, or the greater the number of species that will be affected by this particular stewardship opportunity. So, and it's provided, it gives you a relative value as well in terms of priority. There's also the question here, it's asking you a question as whether you already doing this particular stewardship opportunity, and let's say I already have some native grassland, I'm doing this, so that's good. We move on to the next one. There's a second one here. It says consider returning planted area to native grassland. So this is maybe a little bit more difficult to do and could be costly. So I'm just going to say I'm not doing that. Maybe I'm not going to consider doing that either. And move on to the next step. And this one, because I said I'm not doing that, it's giving me an option for an opportunity that may be easier to implement. So this one is, it says, do not plant trees or shrub on or next to native prairie. I'm gonna say no on this one, but I'm gonna say, yes, I would consider doing that. So those are the three top ones that have been presented. Now, there's a section here where it's actually asking you to enter additional information, and that's for the benefit of your package as well. It's saying we answered this question: retain and maintain the land as native prairie. We answered already that one. We said I'm already doing this, and we can say it makes sense for my operation. So, and then we can go to the next one, consider returning planted area to native grassland. So that was about cropland, returning it to native grassland. We can say, well, it's costly and long-term. So that's why I'm not wanting to get into that right away. So, and there's more like this that you can answer. The whole top package, the first package is all there. So you can answer all these, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to move on to the report itself. So there's a PDF report that's provided, and this is all part of in Alberta, it's all part of the environmental farm plan, which is done online in Alberta. So that goes into the private, if you want, package for the producer. So there's the name of the producer. It's entered over here. Normally there's also the legal land description that's entered there. There's the introduction that provide you with details of the different sections of the package. So there's a bit of guidance of what it means, the report means. The packages, the various stewardship opportunity packages that are listed there, some of the easy to do stewardship opportunities. And then we have the list of species that potentially occur on this quarter section, along with some extra resources to find out more information about those species, list of key organizations to help out, and disclaimer. And then those are the questions you answered there. Stewardship activities you're doing and opportunities you are open to be doing. So this is, the first section, understanding the report. First thing we say, we have not asked you if you have species at risk, and we haven't told you that you have species at risk on your land. This is all based on the potential for the species to occur there. There's more information here about the numbers, what they mean, and this is the actual packages that are coming into that are presented. So in this case, there's 3 packages, and you can see so all these stewardship opportunities are given some points, score if you want, and within a package, all these scores are added together to give the total stewardship value of the package. So if somebody was to pick a package and wanted to have the greatest impact on species at risk, then obviously the package number 1 in this case would be the one to choose. So you can see here the various priorities for all of these. We can move on to show the second package here. You can see right away it's got a very much lower value. You go from high score to moving quickly to low. So usually below 10, we're saying, if you want to implement these, talk to someone, because there's a lot of uncertainty that comes into play for us assigning a low value like that. So really the very first package is probably your best bet in this case. Again, this one has a high stewardship score for the first stewardship opportunity, but it moves really quickly to some lower scores over here. So these are the easy to do stewardship opportunities. That was that other ranking of stewardship opportunities that we talked about. Those are ranked in order of highest, the easiest one to a little harder, but a lot of it is based, avoid doing things, do not do things, or keep your native prairie, avoid building trails. So it's fairly easy to implement, and really they do have an impact on species at risk. So they're all good to know and good to implement. And the next section is about so this is your list of species that potentially occur in your quarter section, selected quarter sections. We have they're in alphabetical order, and you have the level of endangerment. That's the status that's presented there, and each of these hyperlinks provide you more information about that species somewhere else on the internet. Yeah, and those are the key organizations that you could contact to get a little more information, or visit their website, and they might be able to help you with some implementation as well, or could be some funding opportunities. So there's the final thing is it's not quite final yet, I think. The disclaimer, where we say some of the recommendation may involve important changes to the management of the selected land parcel. So before you make important changes, you contact some organization or expert to make sure that this is the right thing for you. And this is the section where this is the information that you provided about the stewardship opportunities, where you answer some questions, those that you are doing already. So we want to acknowledge that you are doing some things that are important for species at risk, and those are the ones that you would consider doing given an opportunity. So this is it for me. I'm going to return that to Heather for the closing.
Thank you, Francois. If I could get my screen share. Carolyn, please. Show my screen. And big current slide. There we go. So thank you, Francois. That was great. As you can see, it's not a simple process to build this tool, and but yet the output I think can be fairly helpful and accessible. So the question then is, where are we at in Saskatchewan? Currently, we are ready to start testing the tool. It's just about to be fully populated with the data, and will be functional, although not to the public, by the end of this month. And the tool then will start testing the tool and modifying accordingly, so that we've make sure that it's working the way we expect it to. And then the intent is to eventually customize the interface and the output reports through beta testing and consultation with conservation groups, but also with landowners directly. And we would anticipate that it would be coming online within this coming year. And so be aware that the tool is a living document. Some of the things that we're starting in Saskatchewan are being added to the Alberta tool, and it's a big, long, iterative process, always trying to make it better. So it'll be updated as data becomes available, and expected changes would be improved stewardship opportunities if we get feedback on what's being offered, and additional occurrence data may come in, and more habitat suitability models, which are very effective for accurate estimates of where a species might occur. And access to the online tool. At this point, the tool, no, always, this tool is built as a standalone online tool. The plan is to host the tool on the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association website once the full trials and adjustments are complete. And it may be integrated with the new online environmental farm plan once it's developed, but it will remain as a standalone tool. And just to preempt one of the favorite questions about this tool is who sees the data for my land? And I think Francois already addressed this in terms of the security levels, but basically only the landowner. So there's secured password access to the tool, which you saw Francois using. The species data in the tool is not identified as being occurrence, model, or range source data, so you don't actually know what informed the tool as to why that species might be listed on your list. No data input by the landowners is stored. And the output reports, as Francois showed you, are stored only for the landowner's use and access. So the potential exists for the landowner to choose to share that information with an agency that may be helping them with their stewardship work. So essentially, it kind of functions like a undepletable free vending machine for habitat assessment and stewardship information. And we're hoping to make it accessible to everyone. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your interest. I look forward to working with producers to make this tool better and to work for them. And to thank Francois, who collaborated in the original build of the Alberta online tool and is assisting greatly with the adaptations for Saskatchewan. It would not be happening without Francois. And also to thank Cedric McLeod, who's the executive director of CFGA. He kind of keeps the wheels on the bus and also going around. And thanks to Environment and Climate Change Canada for funding, and obviously CFGA for operating this project. And lastly, and not least, I'd like to thank Carolyn and PCAP for inviting us to present here. And I appreciate your time and attention. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Francois and Heather. That was great. There are a few questions, but we don't have a whole lot of time. So if you could keep your answers brief, we'll maybe put 2. Is there somewhere we can sign up to volunteer as landowners to help test it?
Sorry, I'm just trying to Go-To wants me to answer some questions. We're going to start off with producers that have worked with association or with groups right now. Maybe the best way to connect, Nature Saskatchewan has talked about incorporating, offering some of their landowners. So that might be a way if you connect with Nature Saskatchewan or through PCAP, just to connect with interest for that. And that would get through to me.
Sure, that sounds good. And another question from Tom. Do they have to enter each quarter section separately? Like if he has 27 quarters, does he only view the management quarter by quarter?
So what we are working on a system to try to lump groups like larger pastures, etc. But at this point, what we're asking is that a producer can input a representative quarter. So yes, nobody wants to enter 10 sections of land. So we'll be putting in and saying, okay, well, this one represents this, section here that I treat in a certain way. And that's how we're proposing that we move forward with this as a start.
Okay, thank you. So that's all the time we have for Francois and Heather. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We are going to move on to our presentation. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I'm currently at home because we're quarantining, so my internet isn't as good as it normally is when I'm at the office. So next up, we have Sue Mahalski, who is a beef and lamb producer. Her work experience centers on livestock and range management, conservation planning, and agri-environmental policy. So Sue, if you want to unmute yourself and just say something to make sure that your audio works when your section comes up.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm, as I said before, Carolyn Gannett. I've been with the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan since 2017, and I have over 10 years of experience with habitat stewardship, research, and data collection. So our presentation is on this multi-species habitat attribute guide that we are developing. I'll just start with a bit of background information, and then Sue will go through some examples for you. So the first habitat attribute guide was completed in 2014 for the greater sage grouse by the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, Inc. And to develop this sage grouse guide, they reviewed existing sage grouse recovery programs and recovery strategies and action plans applicable to the silver sagebrush habitat. They went through scientific literature and enlisted species advisors. And the review focused on information related to, I guess, providing optimal silver sagebrush habitat for greater sage grouse. And they also included the evaluation of results-based practices. So then PCAP started developing species guides in 2016, kind of based on their model. And since then, we've completed 9 guides on the burrowing owl, the piping plover, the loggerhead shrike, the northern leopard frog, the Baird sparrow, the chestnut-colored longspur, the swift fox, the monarch, and the little brown myotis, or little brown bat. And so these guides were developed along the same lines. We used recovery strategies or management plans, scientific literature, and consulted species experts to determine optimal habitat attributes. The PCAP single species guides also include non-habitat beneficial management practices for the species. We also received data from Dr. Steve Davis from the Canadian Wildlife Service for the Sprague's pipit and the thick-billed longspur, which used to be known as the McCowan's longspur. So between these 11 species and the sage grouse, we'll have 12 species in our guide. So there are different opinions on whether conservation should focus on a single species, multiple species, the community, a landscape, or an ecosystem, and each focus has their own pros and cons, which I won't go into today. But overlapping habitat attributes exist between multiple species at both the landscape scale and the finer site scale, which may present challenges to management if habitat requirements are mutually exclusive on a parcel of land. So we thought the next logical step was to combine our single species guides to see where those habitat attributes overlap and contrast. So there's already a lot of, or there's other programs that focus on multi-species management. It's not a new approach. Like Grasslands National Park has a multi-species management plan. There's like multi-species action plan for the south of the Divide area, so it's not new. Here's kind of an example. So these are Heather's illustrations that she did for our single species guides. So managing habitat for a Sprague's pipit, which is here at the top, requires like continuous grass vegetation that's not too tall. See, it avoids tall, dense vegetation, and not too short. So it prefers this like medium height, medium density vegetation, which you get by light to moderate grazing and other disturbances like periodic prescribed fires. And so that might reduce habitat availability for species that have other requirements, like the loggerhead shrike, for tall shrubs and vegetation of like variable height. Yeah, so that disturbance, that management of grasslands, the fire and the grazing often removes the woody vegetation from, or prevents woody encroachment and that kind of thing. So it's important to consider multiple species. The other concepts I want to define are BMPs and habitat attributes. So beneficial management practices is any management practice that reduces or eliminates an environmental risk. So an example of that would be like to avoid using insecticides on native grasslands, or avoid planting woody vegetation in native rangeland and that kind of thing. Whereas the habitat attribute is defined as any living or non-living feature of an environment that provides resources necessary for a species in a particular setting. So an example of that would be like vegetation height or density, or the amount of woody vegetation and things like that. So we've had many conversations with Heather over the past year discussing how our projects, like this, our guide versus the CFGA tool, how they're different, but they do kind of dovetail into each other, providing more information to landowners. So we'll go through kind of how landowners can use the guide. I'll quickly go through step one, and then Sue will go through the guide itself. So landowners can contact HabiSask to request to sign an agreement to access the protected information in their project screening tool, or they can ask PCAP or myself and send me their quarter sections, and I can do it for them. And so how HabiSask works is once you get into there, you have to turn on all the useful layers like the predictive species models, the rare species occurrences, rangeland ecosites, critical habitat, and all of those things. And then you go into the project screening tool, which is under HabiSask, or sorry, HabiTools, and define like the project area or the ranch or the quarter section. Like you can, if you know where the ranch and all the quarter sections are, you can kind of draw it in, or you can upload like a shapefile of the area, which is probably the easiest. Anyways, and then from there you create a report with all the species that occur there. So on this example, we have the monarch, the Baird sparrow, the burrowing owl, the chestnut-collared longspur, the loggerhead shrike, the thick-billed longspur, northern leopard frog, piping plover, and Sprague's pipit. So 9 out of the 12 species included in our guide. And then you have to go back to HabiSask and kind of query for rangeland ecosites to see which ecosite would occur on the ranch. And then you get a report with all the ecosites like you see So on this particular ranch, there's saline sub-irrigated, solonetzik, loam, solonetzik overflow, and overflow. Those are all the types of ecosites that you would find there. Yeah, so then we'll go on to Stu. You can take it from here and describe what an ecosite is.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to have to tell you when to advance the slides, I guess, since it's still on your computer. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to work through an example, and Carolyn kind of designed step one so that there was some overflow ecosites on her Happy Sask selection. So it's the overflow ecosite that we're going to work through as an example. And the guide's going to be divided by ecosite. So there'll be a section on each ecosite grouping, and then all of the species at risk habitat information for that ecosite. So on this little table I have here, I just want to show you what level we're working at. So the overflow ecosite is actually so overflow ecosite, for those who need a definition, it's land that experiences an overland flow of water, normally at least once a year. So it's subdivided into 3 different categories. So kind of an upland overflow, overflow on solonetzik soils, and overflow on saline soils. We don't have the data to work at the subdivided level, so we're going to work at the main ecosite level. So overflow, which includes all those 3 subcategories, is going to be the ecosite level that we are demonstrating here today. So next slide. Carolyn, thank you. So this is just a legend for the map that I'm going to show next. So the range ecosites for southern Saskatchewan, and I just want to point out in the 3rd column there, the first 3 colors, like that lime green thing, and then lime green with black dots, and then lime green with brown dots. Those are the 3 subcategories of overflow. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about where those are in Saskatchewan. Now, it's hard to see. In fact, it's really hard to see now. It was hard to see on my computer at this scale, but I'll just describe, because I can't, so I'm assuming you guys can't see that lime green hardly anywhere. But it occurs mainly in southwest Saskatchewan. So it's along the Frenchman River. It's in the east block of Grasslands National Park. There's some in the 3 federal pastures down in the southwest. There is some along the river up in the Sandhills, and there's some just south of Saskatoon. There are overflow ecosites in the moist mixed grass as well, but they don't show up at this scale, and it's quite rare on the east side of the province. So next slide. So in the guide, we will describe the ecosite, and the typical plant communities in an ecosite are one of the things that we're going to include. So in the overflow ecosite, sort of typical plant communities would include the silver sagebrush wheatgrass, which is shown in the photo there in the corner, and a typical grass community without very many shrubs would be the western wheatgrass, western porcupine grass, northern wheatgrass community. And we call that a reference community because it's, I wouldn't say in the absence of disturbance, but it's in the absence of disturbance that would have a big effect on that plant community. So if there is a disturbance like heavy grazing or intense fire or even recreational use that modifies that community, it moves into that next community that I have listed there. So pasture sage, western wheatgrass. So if you're familiar at all with the types of plant communities we have in the province, that gives you a good overview of what the overflow ecosite supports. So next slide. So here's a list of the species at risk found on the overflow ecosite, and we had the Saskatchewan CDC basically run a test on their database to give us this information. So it's very similar actually to the list that Carolyn had from her Habisask example there. So I'm not going to go through it species by species. Next slide. So here's a sample, and the next few slides are different samples of multi-species habitat information that we're producing that are going to be included in the guide. In the top left-hand corner there, you can see the legend, and so we've basically divided the attributes into preferred, which is green, less preferred but still used, which is yellow, and not preferred, so they're rarely found there, which is red. So this example is bare ground, and in this situation we've given you two graphs, one for the moist mixed grass ecoregion and one for the mixed grassland ecoregion. And the reason we did that was to illustrate that some of these species respond differently to habitat attributes depending on what ecoregion they're in. So if you look at Baird sparrow in the moist mixed grass, they're less tolerant of like 0 to 5% bare ground than they are in the mixed grass. In the mixed grassland, it's perfect. They can go right down to 0 bare ground without any problem. The other thing that the two graphs show is that extra species that occurs in the mixed grass. So I'm going to call it McCown's longspur because I'm not, in a couple of years maybe I can call it thick-billed, but right now it's McCown's. So we add McCown's longspur because it occurs in the mixed grass and it's not common in the moist mixed grass. So next slide. Good. So this is litter, so in pounds per acre. And there's an additional species on the bottom of here. We've got the 4 birds that we had in the last slide as well. But we've got northern leopard frog also responds to litter. So it has some intolerances of too much or too little litter. And you'll notice that the line for the northern leopard frog has, instead of these cutoffs that we have for the birds, it's sort of a gradient, and that's just basically because we don't have as good a data for the northern leopard frog as we do for the birds. So next slide. So I should note, while Carolyn's switching that the bird data, and she alluded to this already, was analyzed for us by Dr. Steve Davis from a mega data set from numerous studies. So thousands of bird sampling has gone into this, and he modeled these tolerances and preferences from that large database for us, so that we have really good data for the grassland bird species. So this is vegetation height, and what I wanted to point out here is the conflict between species for vegetation height. So you can see that Baird sparrow and Sprague's pipit like that sort of middle of the range height in the kind of 10 to 20 centimeter range, whereas chestnut colored longspur and McCown's are in the shorter end, with McCown's of course being shortest. So you couldn't manage the same parcel for both species. And there's a lot to say about this. It's fairly complex, but so managing for all 4 of those species basically means that you would have to manage for different habitat attributes on different parts of your land base. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what scale we're talking about for that. So next slide. So this is visual obstruction, and that's basically how well the animals can see and how well predators can see them. So you can see that Baird's and Sprague's pipit like to have a little bit of cover, probably so they can't be seen as easily by predators, whereas the longspurs like to have good sight lines. And I know from doing the individual guides for the longspurs that that is what they need for hunting for prey. So I should point out here that the habitat attributes that we're using are those that have been identified by the species experts as being important for the species. So next slide. So this is shrub cover, shrubs less than 1 meter high. So we've got a couple of extra species here, which is great, although it does kind of portray that most endemic grassland species are intolerant of woody vegetation because they're all on the left-hand side there. The green is all on the left-hand side. But sage grouse will end up on this graph for the overland ecosite in the final document. We just haven't got that far, and they do have a preference for low sagebrush, so there will be something of a conflict showing up in this graph later. So I should note here that the species attributes that we're using are primarily at the site level, and so I can give you like a little bit of an idea of how that works. So for example, some of the grassland birds, their home ranges are like less than 10 acres, but they select for a home range based on kind of suitable habitat within at least a quarter section in size. So if you're trying to manage for more than one species, you need to do it on a scale bigger than a quarter section, because you might be managing 1/4 section for Baird's sparrow and Sprague's pipit, and another one for another suite of species. So just to give you kind of a scale that this can be applied from. So next slide. So that's all the graphs that we have to show you. There will be others coming for the guide, but what another section in the guide we have to deal with individual habitat attributes. And the reason that we're putting a section in on individual habitat attributes is because there are attributes for species that aren't relevant to other species. And so the example I have here is the monarch butterfly. The monarch really doesn't respond to any of the multi-species attributes that we have in the multi-species guide. So we're going to do just a short section that basically summarizes that we have in our guides to individual species. So a little map from the CDC on where the monarch's likely to occur, Heather's overview graph that shows what they like and what they don't like from a higher level, and then the next slide, Carolyn. So this table from our habitat species guide for the monarch will go in, and you can see the monarch has really specific habitat requirements. So when we did this guide, the experts advised us to divide it up into habitat attributes for natural habitat, for agriculture habitat, and for restored habitat. And the restored habitat is in there because there are a lot of acres of restored habitat that have been restored specifically for monarch butterfly. So for breeding habitat for the monarchs, they respond to things like the patch size and configuration of milkweed, how far the milkweed patches are away from each other, what the density of milkweed is within a patch, how many species of milkweed there are, And then there's a whole, you can go to the next slide. There's a whole similar sort of bunch of features for their nectaring plants. So nectaring habitat, same sort of thing, diversity, frequency, and then migrating and staging habitat, which we have very little of in Saskatchewan and we don't know much about it. But basically they need nectaring for diversity and roosting locations. So none of those attributes are really relevant to any other species. So that's my best example of why we need to put the individual ones in there too. So next slide. So this is, which longspur am I looking at? Chestnut colored, thank you. So this is the single species information for the chestnut colored longspur, and it is pretty much the opposite of the monarch. Most of the species, or most of the habitat attributes that are applicable to the chestnut colored longspur are multi-species attributes. So the only thing that I can point out on the diagram there that isn't included in as a multi-species attribute is that avoidance of structures. And I noticed that Heather mentioned wind turbines in her presentation, and so this would be an example of that they avoid wind turbines. So that would be about the only species or habitat attribute that's different from a bunch of other species. So next slide. So I'm not going to go through any of this in detail. We have for the individual species, we've divided up the habitat attributes by landscape scale, which is overview, GIS level type things, topography, soil type, land cover, that kind of thing, and then site scale habitat, which is the next slide, Carolyn. And the site scale habitat, as I said earlier, is the focus of the multi-species attributes that we'll cover in the guide. So I'm just going to close my part of the presentation by saying that we've been learning over the years that managing for habitat quality is one of the best ways to recover species. Many other types of activities, land securement, many of the BMPs are about slowing the decline, and of course we need to do both. But for sure, if we want to recover species, we're going to have to work at restoring habitat and improving the quality of it. So that's our focus here. So that's it. That's the end of my section. Carolyn, are you going to close it off?
Yes, thank you, Sue. So in addition to Sue's conclusion and take-home messages, I also want to mention that heterogeneity is very important while managing for multiple species. We need lots of patchy habitat to accommodate all the species that need habitat. And the idea for our guide is that we can provide landowners with the information about what species need, and then the landowners can take that into account if they want to attract those species. So that's all I have for our presentation. Just a thank you to Steve Davis for analyzing that data. As Sue said, his data set has 5,000 data points throughout southern Saskatchewan, so it's quite big and useful. Also, thank you to Heather and Eric, who are contractors on the project. Heather did all the graphs, and Eric did some work early on. So we don't really have time for questions since it's already past 8:30. So I think for the questions that are there, we'll answer them directly, or We'll answer all of them and then send them all to the participants, I think. I think that might be the easiest, and that way you guys can be kind of let off the hook for the evening since it's already late. So on behalf of Nature Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, I would sincerely like to thank Ashley, Heather, Francois, and Sue for their great presentations today, and to our listeners for tuning in. Thank you all so much for attending this workshop. You will receive an email, or I guess some kind of link for the survey. It's just a quick questionnaire. Please fill it out. It'll take maybe 2 minutes. It'll give us more information about who you are and how we can improve these workshops and things like that. For upcoming events, like the PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series, or the last presentation of our Prairie's Got the Goods Week, which is tomorrow, you can check out PCAP's website, which is www.pcap-sk.org. And remember to check out the Nature Saskatchewan and PCAP YouTube channels in the near future for the recording of this video. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thanks so much, everybody.